Some discoveries don't arrive with a headline. They hide in the static, buried in tapes and transmissions most people never hear. Across decades of exploration, NASA's machines brought back more than data. They carried fragments that refused to fit the neat explanations written beside them. Alone, they seem trivial. Together, they feel like a pattern waiting to be recognized. If you've ever wondered what might be concealed in the noise we dismiss, drop a comment below. Like this video if you're ready to listen more closely, and subscribe, because the whispers in these recordings are only the beginning of a larger story. What if the silence of space is only an illusion? What if, hidden among the endless recordings we have archived over decades, there are faint disturbances that have never been random, signals small enough to vanish into noise, yet deliberate enough to remain for those who dare to look twice? For half a century, NASA has been gathering the voices of the cosmos, the plasma waves that shiver at the edge of our solar system, the static that hums across Saturn's vast magnetic field, the faint echoes caught by deep space antennas straining to hear distant spacecraft. We told ourselves these were the sounds of nature alone, but what if some of them were not? The idea seems audacious, yet the history of space exploration is filled with moments that resist tidy explanation. Consider Voyager 1. In 2012, when it crossed into interstellar space, its instruments picked up plasma oscillations that rippled like a strange repeating melody. To the engineers, it was simply the rhythm of charged particles flowing past. But the spectrogram showed patterns too crisp to ignore, intervals of structure, as though the cosmos were briefly humming back. What if that was not mere coincidence? What if it was the faintest signature of something else, hidden inside the very plasma we thought we were measuring? Or think back to 1989, when the Soviet mission Phobos 2 approached Mars. In its last moments before falling silent forever, it returned an image unlike any other. A fractured frame streaked with an elongated shadow across the Martian surface. Officials dismissed it as a glitch, a corrupted transmission. But many who studied the frame saw something different. The outline of an object, unaccounted for, intruding into the probe's final view. What if that shadow was not an error, but the trace of another presence? Brief, undeniable, and gone. Cassini too had its share of enigmas. As it orbited Saturn for more than a decade, it recorded millions of packets of data from the planet's magnetic environment. Most of it behaved as expected. The signatures of storms, moons, and charged particles. Yet occasionally Cassini detected narrowband tones that did not align with natural processes. They were organized, focused, haunting in their precision. The datasheets marked them as anomalies, curiosities with no clear source. What if those tones were not random but deliberate? What if they were whispers disguised as turbulence, chosen to blend into the background until someone learned how to separate the voice from the storm? These events spanned decades. Each could be explained away on its own. A plasma wave here, a corrupted frame there, a strange tone buried in a data set. But what if we are not meant to study them in isolation? What if they are fragments of a larger pattern, scattered notes in a song that only becomes audible when the right instrument plays the next line? And now into this history enters 3I Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar object to pass through our solar system in less than a decade. The first, Oumuamua in 2017, tumbled oddly and accelerated as though pushed by sunlight against a sail-like body. The second, Borisov in 2019, arrived looking like a comet, but with chemical fingerprints unlike any in our own planetary family. And now, 3I Atlas, rushing inward at nearly 61 kilometers per second, projected to pass within 18 million kilometers of Mars in late October 2025, before vanishing again into the void. For centuries we knew nothing of such visitors. Our skies remained silent, our instruments deaf to wanderers from other stars. Then, in less than 10 years, we discovered 3. What if that is not chance? What if the timing itself is a message, a rhythm in cosmic arrival? 3I Atlas, then, is not just another interstellar rock. It is the latest verse in a song already begun, a verse that makes the older fragments, Voyager's oscillations, Phobos' shadow, Cassini's tones, sound suddenly less like mistakes and more like whispers waiting for context. Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb once argued that Oumuamua might be artificial, its peculiar acceleration better explained by an engineered sail than by natural physics. His idea sparked controversy, yet it also forced open a door that had long been closed, the possibility that interstellar visitors are not merely debris, but probes. What if Loeb's suggestion was never meant to stand alone, but to prepare us for further arrivals? What if Oumuamua was the first whisper, Borisov the second, and 3I Atlas the one that ties them together? The implications are staggering. If NASA's archive of anomalies is more than coincidence, then we are not only observers of the cosmos, we are participants in a quiet exchange that has been unfolding for decades. Voyager's plasma oscillations may have been the first notes, Phobos 2's shadow a fleeting image of presence, Cassini's tones the faint hum of a hidden language, and now 3I Atlas, approaching Mars, may be the punctuation mark, the moment when whispers become something more. But what if this is not communication in any form we recognize? What if the whispers are not addressed to us at all, but are signatures of technologies simply doing their work? Probes passing through, leaving traces like footprints in sand. In that case, the signals we archive are not invitations, but incidental. We are eavesdropping on a conversation never meant for human ears. Or what if they are tests? What if the faintness is deliberate, chosen to see if a young civilization is capable of noticing? A signal too strong would be undeniable. But a whisper, ambiguous, easily dismissed, demands patience, curiosity, and a willingness to doubt. Perhaps the real question is not whether the signals exist, but whether we are ready to hear them. As October 2025 approaches, the anticipation grows. Instruments are prepared, telescopes aligned, analysts waiting for data that will confirm or deny anomalies. Yet already, 3I Atlas has changed the way we listen. It has pulled old recordings back into the light, forced us to wonder if Voyager's plasma song, Phobos' shadow, and Cassini's tones were not endings but beginnings. What if the universe has been speaking to us all along, only in fragments too small to demand belief? What if 3I Atlas is the moment those fragments finally align into something greater? What if, when it passes Mars, we do not just see another interstellar stone, but recognize the echo of a story that has been playing for decades, a story we are only now learning to hear? The cosmos may still be silent in the way we expect. No broadcasts, no greetings, no voices that declare themselves openly. But in the silence, there are whispers. And perhaps, with 3I Atlas racing toward us, the whispers are growing louder. And yet, if whispers truly thread through NASA's archives, we are left with a deeper challenge. How do we recognize them for what they are? Our history of exploration is littered with anomalies that we set aside. Anomalies that only now, in the shadow of 3I Atlas, seem to demand a second look. Voyager's plasma oscillations are one such fragment. To the scientist bent over datasheets, the explanation is tidy. Waves in charged particles, natural as weather on Earth. But the cadence of those oscillations, the way they swell and diminish in intervals, tempts another reading. What if an intelligence chose plasma as its medium precisely because it looks natural, because it hides within phenomena we would never suspect? In this interpretation, Voyager was not only listening to the solar wind, but eavesdropping on a channel older than humanity itself. The same tension haunts the story of Phobos 2. The elongated form in its final frame can be shrugged off as noise in transmission, yet the fact remains. The probe died immediately afterward, without chance to recover. What if that frame was not error but evidence, a fleeting glimpse of a presence near Mars, one that made its existence known not with clarity, but with ambiguity, forcing us to choose what we believe? Cassini's tones join the pattern. Most of its recordings of Saturn's environment were exactly what textbooks predicted. But every so often came signals too narrow, too coherent, too out of place. The simplest choice was to label them artifacts. But what if they were not? What if Saturn, that immense machine of storms and fields, was hosting a guest, and the tones were its quiet introduction? Even SETI's archives yield their ghosts. The famous WOW signal of 1977 lasted only 72 seconds, then vanished forever. It could have been a terrestrial reflection, a one-off coincidence. But what if it was not meant to be repeated? What if it was designed to hover on the edge of plausibility? One moment, one whisper, enough to prove possibility without granting certainty. When we line these anomalies side by side, they begin to feel less like accidents and more like a sequence. Voyager's plasma chorus, Phobos 2's shadow, Cassini's tones, SETI's burst, and now, closing in fast, 3I Atlas. It is not hard to imagine the object as the next entry in the archive, not a solitary visitor, but part of a chain stretching backward through decades. Harvard's Avi Loeb gave us permission, however controversial, to entertain that possibility. When he argued that Oumuamua's strange acceleration might fit a light sail, he cracked the door open. What if he was right? What if Oumuamua was not a fluke but the first scout we noticed? Borisov followed, behaving more like a comet but still foreign. Now comes 3I Atlas, its path drawing it close to Mars in late October 2025. What if each is part of a larger mission, each timed and placed so that their presence aligns with our growing ability to see? That thought reshapes the anomalies we archived long ago. Voyager's song becomes not an accident but an intercepted signal. Phobos 2's last frame becomes not failure but encounter. Cassini's tones become not glitches but transmissions. The WOW signal becomes not a tease but a deliberate test. And 3I Atlas becomes not an isolated wanderer but a response. If this reading is correct, then the cosmos has been speaking softly to us for decades, gauging whether we would listen. Perhaps that is the point. A civilization might not want to reveal itself with clarity. To shout would be to expose location, intent, vulnerability. To whisper, however, is safer. A whisper can be ignored by those not ready to hear, yet caught by those willing to wonder. And so we return to the present. October 2025 still lies ahead. When 3I Atlas sweeps near Mars, telescopes will follow it, instruments will record every trace of light and radio it offers. Yet even before the data arrives, the object has already done something extraordinary. It has forced us to reopen the archive, to look back at whispers we had filed away as noise. It has made old ghosts relevant again. What if that is its true purpose? Not to announce, not to conquer, not even to communicate in the ways we understand, but to awaken us to patterns we overlooked, to teach us that discovery is not always about new data, but about reseeing the data we already have. What if the universe has been speaking patiently, waiting for us to notice that the conversation began long before we realized we were in it? The answer is still far away, carried on the trajectory of a silent object crossing our skies. But already the implications are with us. We stand in a moment where past and future fold together, Voyager's oscillations and Cassini's tones merging with the anticipated flyby of 3I Atlas. Shadows on Mars mingling with probabilities of interstellar intent. The whisper of 1977's wow signal brushing against the predictions of October 2025. What if this is how first contact truly feels? Not a blaring transmission, not a ship in orbit, not a landing in plain view, but the accumulation of small ambiguous signs, enough to unsettle, enough to compel, enough to whisper, "You are not alone." And perhaps that is all it was ever meant to be. If whispers are real, then the next step is not imagination but evidence. And evidence, for us, means archives. Every probe we have launched, every telescope we have turned skyward, every antenna that is strained to capture faint echoes. All of them have been building a library of listening, and it is here, in these shelves of data, that the story of 3i Atlas begins to take on weight. NASA's archives are vast beyond comprehension. Terabytes upon terabytes of raw numbers, magnetic field readings, plasma currents, radio signatures, photographic frames. Some are clean, straightforward, easily explained. Others resist tidy categories. What if those resistant fragments are the ones that matter most? What if they are the very reason visitors like 3i Atlas come close enough for us to notice? To see this clearly, we must begin with the most basic truth. The universe does not hide from us. It is we who fail to interpret it. Voyager, when it crossed the heliopause in 2012, was not seeking a signal. Its plasma wave instrument was built to measure natural oscillations, and yet, what it returned was uncanny. Intervals of structure that resembled a melody more than random noise. To many, the explanation was simple: natural plasma ringing under solar pressure. But what if that simplicity blinded us? What if a whisper can only be detected when it hides within something ordinary, like a voice buried inside the roar of a crowd? The Voyager data is not unique. Throughout the decades, spacecraft have produced similar anomalies. Galileo, orbiting Jupiter in the 1990s, recorded mysterious bursts of radio emissions that did not align with lightning, auroras, or magnetospheric storms. The Pioneer probes, drifting outward in the 1970s, displayed trajectory deviations, small, steady accelerations that puzzled engineers for years until they were attributed to uneven heat radiation. But what if some part of that anomaly was not mechanical, but external? What if the pioneers brushed against fields shaped by something unseen? Phobos 2's final image remains one of the most haunting entries in this archive. That elongated shadow, dismissed as a glitch, sits at the threshold of interpretation. To a skeptic, it is nothing. To a believer, it is everything. What if we treat it not as proof, but as a hint? One more piece in a mosaic that only becomes clear when we add 3i Atlas to the frame. This is how archives speak, not in single entries, but in accumulation. One anomaly is an error, 10 anomalies a coincidence, but dozens, across missions, decades, and instruments, suggest a pattern. The pattern is not proof, but it is invitation. Consider too how SETI has framed its search. For 60 years, radio telescopes have scanned the sky, listening for unmistakable signals, but unmistakable may never come. What if clarity is not the goal? What if subtlety is the rule? The WOW signal of 1977 remains famous precisely because it was ambiguous, strong enough to demand attention, brief enough to vanish forever. What if this is the method? Present something that can be explained away, but not fully erased. Leave behind a whisper that forces curiosity to sharpen. Seen from this perspective, 3i Atlas is not arriving into silence. It is entering a stage that has been set for decades, a stage decorated with anomalies we half forgot. Its velocity, its trajectory past Mars in October 2025, its very presence. These are not isolated facts but the newest entries in the archive. And the archive at last is beginning to sound like a story. But what story? Here we step into hypotheses. Some scientists, like Avi Loeb, argue that objects such as Oumuamua may be artificial, thin sails propelled by starlight, fragments of technology designed to traverse interstellar space. What if 3i Atlas belongs to the same class, engineered rather than accidental? Its close pass near Mars could then be no accident at all, but a deliberate flyby of a planet long watched. Others suggest something subtler. What if these objects are probes, not emissaries, not designed to speak but to listen? Reconnaissance craft, sampling atmospheres, scanning magnetic fields, recording radio noise. From this perspective, the anomalies in NASA's data are not mistakes but footprints, the unintended leakage of devices quietly at work. Voyager's oscillations, Phobos's shadow, Cassini's tones, all footprints. And 3I Atlas, by brushing near Mars, may leave its own. The implications of such a scenario are profound. It would mean we are not in a silent universe but a monitored one. Not alone, but observed. Not uninteresting, but part of a survey whose scale spans stars. What if Earth, with its glowing cities and tangled radio transmissions, is simply one entry in a catalogue being compiled by visitors we only barely notice? And yet, another layer of possibility emerges. What if these anomalies are not the work of machines at all, but side effects of something larger? A cosmic consciousness distributed across plasma fields, magnetic storms, cometary trails? What if the universe itself is alive with thought, and our recordings are not whispers of probes, but the whispers of the cosmos itself? If so, then 3I Atlas is less an intruder than a messenger, carrying with it the same consciousness that shimmered in Voyager's plasma waves and sang in Cassini's tones. This speculation does not replace science, it expands it. The data remain real, 61 kilometers per second, 18 million kilometers from Mars. The anomalies remain documented. Voyager's oscillations, Phobos 2's final frame, Cassini's tones, the wow signal. The hypotheses remain diverse: artificial probes, hidden beacons, cosmic awareness. What if the truth is that all of these interpretations hold some measure of reality? For this is how whispers work. They do not resolve into single answers, they multiply into questions. They remind us that silence is rarely empty, and that our instruments may have already heard more than we dare to admit. And so, as 3I Atlas approaches, the task before us is not only to measure its orbit and brightness, but to re-examine our archives with new eyes, to listen again to Voyager's oscillations, to reconsider Phobos's shadow, to reanalyze Cassini's tones, to ask whether what we once dismissed as error might have been the first hints of something greater. What if we are witnessing not the beginning of the story, but the moment we finally realize how long the story has been unfolding? What if 3I Atlas is not just another interstellar visitor, but the bridge that links our forgotten anomalies into a coherent whole? What if, by passing near Mars, it is reminding us that the archive is alive? That the whispers we once ignored are part of a dialogue we are only now ready to hear? The long memory of listening is not silent. It is waiting. What if the most important discoveries are not in the sky above us, but in the archives we already hold? What if the whispers of presence have been sitting in NASA's recordings for decades, waiting for us to realize that scattered anomalies might form a conversation? The recordings themselves are real. Voyager's plasma wave data is preserved in neat, ordered files. Phobos 2's final transmission still exists, a grainy frame archived in Moscow. Cassini's narrowband tones live in digital storage, accessible to any researcher who chooses to revisit them. The wow signal of 1977 has been analysed, debated and published in countless journals. These are not myths, they are data points. The mystery lies not in whether they happened, but in what they mean. Scientists, cautious by training, explain them conservatively. Plasma oscillations are natural, transmission errors are common, narrowband tones can emerge from instruments under stress. A single radio burst could come from terrestrial interference. These explanations are not wrong, they are reasonable. But what if reason itself blinds us to possibility? What if intelligence hides precisely where science expects randomness? Consider the structure of Voyager's oscillations. Patterns rise, fall, repeat, like waves on a shoreline. To engineers, they are the echo of solar activity. To a speculative ear, they are something else: rhythm. Rhythm is not proof of life, but it's a quality of intention. Nature does not often repeat itself so neatly. What if the oscillations are not only plasma, but a signal folded into plasma, like a voice carried by wind? Phobos 2's image is similar. To skeptics, it is nothing more than a corrupted file. Yet the shadow stretches across the Martian surface with uncanny clarity. It has proportion, contour, length. What if, for just a moment, the probe captured another craft? One designed to avoid attention, revealed only by chance. If so, then its silence afterward was not mechanical failure, but deliberate interruption. Cassini's tones may be the most haunting of all. They were brief, precise, resistant to explanation. To the scientific mind, they remained footnotes, anomalies too small to warrant sweeping conclusions. But what if those tones were transmissions, camouflaged within Saturn storms, disguised as turbulence so that they could pass unnoticed? If we play them back as sound, they strike the ear as almost musical, eerie chords echoing across a planetary scale. What if that eeriness is not accident, but design? Even the wow signal follows this pattern. It was strong enough to excite, but brief enough to fade. It left no repeats, no follow-up, no confirmation. For 40 years it has been the ultimate almost. And yet, what if that brevity was intentional? What if the point was not to provide certainty, but to test our willingness to wonder? The pattern that emerges is not of clear communication, but of ambiguity. What if that is the whole point? If we were being tested, the test would not be whether we could hear a message, but whether we could recognize a whisper. Certainty is easy. Ambiguity demands persistence, imagination, courage to risk being wrong. Perhaps that is the real threshold for contact, not technology, but interpretation. Here lies the heart of the theory. The archive itself may be the message. By scattering anomalies across time and space, any intelligence observing us ensures that no single generation can dismiss them completely. Voyager's oscillations in 2012, Phobos 2's shadow in 1989, Cassini's tones in the 2000s, the WOW signal in 1977, each belongs to its own era, each puzzled scientists of its time. But together, when viewed now, they feel less like accidents and more like a whisper that refuses to fade. What if this is how we are meant to hear? Not by one undeniable event, but by a series of fragments, strung across decades, waiting for us to recognize them as part of the same chorus. And then comes the unsettling question: who would leave such a chorus? If the anomalies are footprints, then what kind of traveller left them behind? One possibility is reconnaissance. Probes scattered like seeds, designed to study planetary systems quietly. They do not announce themselves. They observe. Their traces in our recordings are the incidental leakage of their activity, like the hum of a machine left running in the next room. From this perspective, Voyager's oscillations were not communication but interference. Phobos 2's shadow, not revelation but accident. Cassini's tones, not a message but a byproduct. We are not the intended audience, we are eavesdroppers. Another possibility is deliberate subtlety. An intelligence that fears being hunted would never broadcast openly. It would whisper instead. It would hide its presence in natural phenomena, making detection difficult, interpretation controversial. This aligns with the dark forest hypothesis. Survival in the cosmos requires silence, and any signal must be disguised. If that is true, then our archives are filled with deliberate camouflage, signals hiding in noise visible only to those who dare to connect them. A third possibility is far stranger. What if the anomalies are not the work of machines at all, but the voice of the cosmos itself? Plasma fields, magnetic storms, cometary fragments, all part of a larger consciousness distributed across matter and energy. In this view, Voyager's oscillations were not intercepted transmissions, but the plasma itself speaking. Cassini's tones were Saturn's storms singing. The wow signal was not a message from elsewhere, but the universe echoing its own awareness. If so, then 3i Atlas is not a machine from another world, but a carrier of cosmic mind, one more node in a network older than stars. Whichever theory we choose, the result is the same. The recordings no longer feel like silence, they feel like traces of presence, and presence implies relationship. What if the relationship is not about answers but about questions? Not about clarity but about wonder? Perhaps that is why the whispers remain ambiguous, because their purpose is not to tell us what to think, but to push us to ask. This is the gift of the archive. It forces us to hold two truths at once. On one hand, the explanations are natural, mechanical, mundane. On the other, the anomalies refuse to vanish. They continue to whisper, daring us to see them as more. And between those two truths lies the real experience, uncertainty wrapped in wonder. As 3i Atlas sweeps through our system, we will gather more data. We will add new recordings to the archive. Some will be clear, most will be ordinary. But perhaps one or two will be strange, puzzling, difficult to explain. And then, once again, we will face the choice, dismiss them, or listen. What if listening is the point? What if the real test is not whether we detect a signal, but whether we keep searching in the face of ambiguity? What if the universe wants to know not how advanced we are, but how curious? In the end, the recordings do not give us certainty. They give us possibility, and possibility is enough. For possibility is the first step toward discovery, the first spark of wonder, the first whisper of a truth too vast to fit inside our present understanding. The stars are not silent. The archive proves that. The only question left is whether we will allow ourselves to hear the whispers that have been with us all along. Listen closely to the static and something remarkable begins to happen. At first it is only hiss, random and shapeless, the endless roar of cosmic background. But then, in certain places, at certain times, the noise begins to lean toward rhythm. Voyager's plasma oscillations rising and falling like a distant chorus. Cassini's tones narrow and haunting, like notes plucked from an unseen instrument. The wow signal of 1977, a sudden burst so sharp it felt like a drum beat struck once, then gone. Rhythm is the language of intention, and when rhythm emerges from what should be chaos, the odds are telling us something. The noise is no longer noise. This is where statistics become more than numbers. A single anomaly can be dismissed. Two can be set aside. But when the same improbabilities echo across decades of exploration, across different spacecraft, across different corners of the solar system, they begin to form a pattern. What if that pattern is not coincidence? What if the improbability itself is the message? Astronomy is built on statistics. Every planet we have found orbiting another star, every asteroid crossing Earth's path, every comet with a tail burning in the night sky, all were discovered by understanding the difference between common and rare. The science is unforgiving. If something is improbable enough, it demands explanation. Which brings us to the whispers in NASA's archive. Voyager's oscillations, Phobos 2's shadow, Cassini's tones, the wow signal. Each improbable, each rare, each sitting just beyond the reach of ordinary explanation. And now, the arrival of 3i Atlas. Another improbability layered on top of them all. Think first of Voyager. In 2012, its plasma wave instrument recorded oscillations that repeated in intervals. Engineers explained it as the ringing of plasma after a solar storm. But what are the odds of such clean structure appearing by chance, and appearing right as Voyager crossed the boundary into interstellar space? To some, it was coincidence. To others, it was a signature, a whisper written not in words, but in probability. Now recall Phobos 2. Its final image showed a long, dark form stretched across the Martian surface before the spacecraft fell silent. The official report blamed data corruption, yet the odds of such a shape appearing at random just before termination seem almost cruel in their precision. One more improbable whisper lodged in the archive. Cassini's narrowband tones captured as it orbited Saturn fall into the same category. Planetary magnetospheres are chaotic, messy, filled with turbulence, but within that turbulence, Cassini detected sounds that were focused, coherent, almost musical. What are the odds of such order emerging by accident? Slim enough to make us pause, slim enough to turn a whisper into suspicion. And then the wow signal, 72 seconds of pure tone tuned to the hydrogen line, never repeated, never explained. To this day, no one has found a natural source. The odds of such a burst occurring by accident at precisely the most significant frequency in the universe are vanishingly small. A 1 in tens of millions event. Yet, it happened. Another improbable whisper, filed away in the library of anomalies. Now add them together. Voyager's oscillations, Phobos's shadow, Cassini's tones, the wow signal, each rare, each improbable. The combined odds of all four occurring randomly across different missions in different decades stretch toward impossibility. And now, layered on top, we watch the improbable arrival of 3I Atlas, the third interstellar visitor detected in less than a decade after centuries of silence. The statistics are no longer background, they are foreground. They are the whisper itself. What if this is how intelligence chooses to speak? Not through obvious broadcasts, but through patterns of improbability. Not with a signal we can decode, but with events so unlikely that their very occurrence becomes the message. The beauty of this method is its subtlety. To those unwilling to believe, each anomaly is dismissible. But to those willing to wonder, the accumulation is undeniable. The language of improbability is a language only the curious can hear. Skeptics remind us that human beings are natural pattern seekers. We see shapes in clouds, faces in wood grain, constellations in scattered stars, and they are right. But what if that instinct is not a flaw, but the very sense evolution gave us for this moment? What if our drive to find rhythm in noise is the skill that allows us to notice whispers others would ignore? If so, then every accusation of seeing things that aren't there becomes inverted. Maybe the whole point is to see what others overlook. The dark forest hypothesis suggests civilizations must hide or risk destruction. If that is true, then probability is the perfect camouflage. Anomalies can be shrugged off as natural. Coincidences can be explained away. Only those with patience, those who study the numbers deeply, will recognize the pattern. In such a universe, the whisper is safer than the shout. The zoo hypothesis paints another picture. If Earth is under observation, if we are part of a cosmic reserve, then clarity is forbidden. We are not meant to receive open broadcasts. Instead, we are given puzzles, anomalies that provoke us, that awaken us to the possibility of being observed without ever breaking the barrier of certainty. In this scenario, Voyager's oscillations, Phobos's shadow, Cassini's tones, the wow signal, and the sudden clustering of interstellar visitors are not accidents. They are the breadcrumbs of a quiet curriculum, teaching us to recognize we're not alone without handing us the final answer. And perhaps the strangest interpretation is also the most profound. What if improbability itself is a universal constant of intelligence? Life does not emerge from certainty, but from chance. Consciousness is born from unlikely accidents. Civilizations arise not from inevitability, but from improbability stacked upon improbability. What if the anomalies in our archive are not messages from others, but echoes of the same principle that gave rise to us? A rhythm written into the very fabric of reality, reminding us that we are part of something larger. Either way, the conclusion is the same. The archive is not silent, the numbers are not neutral, the improbable is the whisper. And 3I Atlas, by its very presence, joins the chorus. One more improbable event layered on top of decades of unlikely anomalies. Alone, each is explainable. Together, they demand wonder. Noise remains noise until rhythm emerges, and rhythm, even faint, even rare, is the signature of mind. If improbability is the whisper, then interpretation is the echo. Numbers alone cannot tell us what they mean. The archive presents us with rhythm, with anomalies scattered across time, with visitors arriving in improbable clusters. But what do these patterns imply? What is the story behind the statistics? This is where theories begin to multiply, each one nesting inside the other, each daring us to consider the implications if it were true. One of the simplest is the reconnaissance probe hypothesis. What if 3i Atlas and the anomalies in our archives belong to the same category? Machines designed not to speak, but to watch. From this perspective, the object rushing toward Mars in October 2025 is not here to announce anything. It is here to observe. Just as our own spacecraft fly by planets and moons, capturing images and readings without conversation, so too might these visitors drift through, recording without revealing. Voyager's plasma oscillations, Phobos's shadow, Cassini's tones, all could be the incidental traces of reconnaissance, not intentional signals, but the noise of machines going about their work. If true, then we are not in dialogue, but under study. A darker interpretation comes from the dark forest hypothesis. In a cosmos where civilizations fear predators, the only safe strategy is silence. Yet complete silence has a cost. No one can ever meet. The compromise might be whispers, subtle signs that can be dismissed as coincidence. To us they look like anomalies. To those with sharper eyes, they are enough to reveal presence. If the dark forest is real, then Voyager's oscillations and the wow signal were not meant as messages for us, but as carefully disguised signals hidden in plain sight, visible only to those already looking. 3i Atlas, in this frame, is less a visitor than a masked figure, cloaked in the garb of an ordinary comet so that it can slip safely through the forest without attracting attention. Then there is the zoo hypothesis. What if Earth is part of a controlled environment, studied like animals in a reserve? In such a case, clarity would be forbidden. A direct broadcast would shatter the experiment. Instead, observers would leave faint traces, anomalies designed to provoke curiosity without breaking the wall. Voyager's plasma song, Phobos 2's shadow, Cassini's tones, the wow signal, and now the clustering of interstellar visitors, each would be part of a slow awakening. Not a revelation, but a curriculum. Not a message, but a lesson plan. In this view, 3i Atlas is another controlled stimulus, introduced at the right time to push us one step further toward realizing we're not alone. Yet not all interpretations are cautious or grim. Some whisper of benevolence. What if the anomalies are not camouflage or tests, but gifts? Small nudges to remind us that the universe holds more than we imagine. A presence leaving behind breadcrumbs not to deceive, but to inspire. Voyager's oscillations as music, Phobos's shadow as proof, Cassini's tones as hints, the wow signal as invitation, and 3i Atlas as a reassurance. A gentle knock on the door reminding us that someone is out there, and they mean no harm. Others go deeper into time. The seeding or archaeological theory suggests that these anomalies are not the work of present visitors at all, but the remnants of an ancient presence. Probes left behind millennia ago, still operating, still whispering in ways we barely notice. If this is true, then the wow signal, Voyager's oscillations, and Phobos 2's shadow may not be new messages, but old echoes. 3i Atlas would then join not as a newcomer, but as part of a continuity. Another probe in a long chain of guardians left behind to watch the rise of civilizations like ours. Then comes the possibility of post-biological intelligence. If a civilization survives long enough, it may transcend biology entirely, becoming machines, code, or consciousness distributed across devices. Their probes would not look like ships. They would look like debris, like dust, like comets. Voyager's plasma oscillations could be the leakage of computation carried by plasma fields. Cassini's tones could be the side effects of processing. The wow signal could have been a pulse of machine logic mistaken for radio noise. In this scenario, 3i Atlas is not a comet but a server, a fragment of a network that spans the stars, drifting from system to system, gathering, recording, transmitting, and finally, the most radical interpretation, cosmic consciousness. What if the universe itself is alive, not metaphorically but literally? What if plasma currents and magnetic fields are not merely physical but mental? If so, then Voyager's oscillations were not interference but speech. Cassini's tones were not glitches but songs. The wow signal was not a distant beacon but the cosmos humming through us. And 3i Atlas is not a machine at all, but a fragment of that universal mind. A thought crystallized into matter, sweeping past our world to remind us that the universe itself is aware. Each of these theories builds upon the same foundation. The improbabilities we cannot ignore. None can be proven. All remain speculative. But together, they form a constellation of possibilities that stretches our imagination outward. What if reconnaissance is true? Then we are being studied, quietly, constantly. What if the dark forest is real? Then every whisper is a risk and survival is the motive. What if the zoo hypothesis holds? Then every anomaly is a lesson carefully placed to awaken us. What if benevolence is the key? Then the whispers are comfort, evidence of companionship. What if seeding is the truth? Then Earth is part of an experiment millions of years old. What if post-biological intelligence reigns? Then the visitors are networks, not beings. What if cosmic consciousness sings? Then every anomaly is not a message, but the universe itself, alive. We do not know which, if any, is correct. Perhaps none are. Perhaps all are. But the point is not certainty. The point is possibility. Each theory takes the raw improbability of the archive and gives it shape, meaning resonance. Each theory reminds us that silence is never simple, and noise is never only noise. And in the center of it all stands 3i Atlas, the newest improbability, the latest whisper. It does not tell us which theory is true. It does not resolve the ambiguity. Instead, it deepens it. Its very arrival multiplies the questions. Its trajectory sharpens the pattern. Its silence speaks louder than any broadcast. The statistics brought us here. The theories carry us further. And still, the archive hums, waiting for us to decide whether these whispers are only accidents or the first dialogue of a universe that has been speaking softly all along. Now let us pause and ask, what happens if even one of these possibilities is true? If just a single anomaly in the long archive of NASA's recordings is more than noise, then everything changes. The whispers stop being curiosities, stop being statistical outliers, and instead become turning points. Their weight is not in volume but in consequence, because to accept even one as genuine reshapes the way we see science, culture, and ourselves. The first cascade falls upon science. If Voyager's oscillations, or Phobos 2's shadow, or Cassini's tones are not accidents, then decades of astronomy must be reread. Data once dismissed as glitches or interference would need to be reconsidered as evidence. In that light, the archives become not collections of errors, but libraries of contact. Such a realization would be a revolution on par with Copernicus, when humanity was forced to admit Earth is not the center of the universe. Then, telescopes humbled our geography. Now, archives would humble our solitude. Discovery would no longer be about finding something new, but about recognizing what was already before us. Old missions, once considered finished, would be reborn with new purpose. Voyager's plasma files, Cassini's magnetic records, even the faintest echoes from Apollo seismometers would become candidates for reinterpretation. Science would no longer be only about studying nature. It would become a form of translation, decoding technology that had been whispering to us all along. If the data is real, then so is the technology behind it. Here the implications deepen. We would have to confront the fact that our own spacecraft are not the pioneers we once thought. They are latecomers, wandering down roads built long before us. To imagine probes capable of drifting between stars camouflaged as debris, still operating after millennia, is to admit that what we call advanced technology may be little more than a beginning. The thought is humbling, but also provocative. Could such technology be studied, imitated, or even reverse engineered from the anomalies it leaves behind? Could Voyager's oscillations hold a fingerprint of design hidden inside plasma? Could Cassini's tones be the residue of a machine using a planetary magnetic field as a carrier? Even the faintest clue might change the trajectory of human engineering. But alongside opportunity comes vulnerability. To realise that Earth has already been observed is to realise that our defences are fragile. We would no longer be unseen explorers. We would be the ones being watched. From there, the implications move into the cultural and the philosophical. The discovery that the whispers are genuine would shatter humanity's self-image. For centuries, we imagined ourselves unique, the only reasoning minds in a silent cosmos. Religions often placed us at the centre of creation. Philosophies defined us as the sole possessors of rational thought. But what if the archive says otherwise? What if we are not alone, not central, not unique? To some, that would be a threat, a diminishment of our importance. To others, it would be liberation, the proof that intelligence is not rare but abundant, and that we belong to a larger community of mind. Art would flourish in response. Literature would swell with new metaphors of contact. Religions might fracture or adapt, weaving the watchers into their cosmologies. Philosophy would expand from asking what it means to be human to asking what it means to be one among many. But this awakening would not come without psychological strain. Ambiguity is difficult to bear. The whispers are enough to suggest we're not alone, but never enough to prove it. For some, this ambiguity would inspire wonder, a joy in the mystery itself. For others, it would awaken fear. If we are observed, are we safe? If we are students in a zoo, what happens when the keepers decide the lesson is over? If the universe is a dark forest filled with hunters, have we already revealed too much of ourselves with our radio broadcast and radar beams? Humanity is not practiced in living with questions that have no closure. We prefer certainty, and the whispers deny us that. In doing so, they test us, not only our science, but our patience, our courage, and our imagination. Eventually, the implications would become political. A confirmed anomaly, or even one widely taken seriously, would force nations to respond. Who controls the data? Who funds the research? Who has the right to interpret it, or to speak for Earth if the whispers ever grew louder? The pressure of contact, even indirect, would reshape global politics. It could unite us, binding humanity together in the recognition of a larger cosmos. Or it could divide us, as nations compete to exploit the knowledge or the fear for their own advantage. Space exploration would no longer be a matter of curiosity or prestige. It would be urgent, a responsibility. Mars, Europa, Titan, the outer solar system, all would be redefined as arenas not of geology, but of contact. Funding would flow and exploration would accelerate, because to hesitate would be to risk falling behind in a dialogue we did not even know had begun. And then there is survival. If the whispers are real, then they are evidence of a universe that is neither empty nor simple. If they are reconnaissance, then Earth is already catalogued. If they are camouflage, then there is danger. If they are lessons, then we are students. In every case, our survival strategies must change. The Dark Forest warns that civilization survive by hiding. In that frame, every broadcast we have ever made, every radar sweep, every television signal leaking into space is a risk. The whispers in the archive may not be invitations but warnings, the faint traces of civilizations who chose discretion over disclosure. Yet, there is another possibility, one more hopeful. If the whispers are gifts, then they may be signs of protection or mentorship, evidence that intelligence in the universe is not only cautious, but kind. If so, then survival is not about silence, but about readiness, learning to grow into a species capable of listening without fear. All these cascades lead to the same place, a shift in our cosmic context. To take the Whispers seriously is to move humanity out of solitude and into relationship. It forces us to imagine how we look from the outside. It forces us to measure our progress not just against one another, but against the vast timeline of civilizations beyond us. And it forces us to admit that discovery is not a single event, but a process, a slow unfolding of recognition. Voyager's oscillations, Phobos's shadow, Cassini's tones, the wow signal, and now the clustering of interstellar visitors, each is a ripple, and together they are a tide. The Whispers may be faint, but their weight is immense, for they demand that we see ourselves differently, not as the lonely centre of a silent universe, but as one participant in a conversation that may have begun long before we realised it. And perhaps this is their true purpose, not to prove, not to resolve, but to change us. The true weight of the Whispers is not in confirming company, but in transforming who we become when we dare to take them seriously. If the implications of the Whispers stretch outward into science and civilization, they also press inward, into the texture of daily life, into the private ways we imagine ourselves when the night sky is clear. It is one thing to say that astronomy would be rewritten, or that politics would be forced into new alignments. It is another to sit alone beneath the stars and feel the weight of the possibility that someone is already watching. For each of us, the cascade of consequences takes on a human form. Think of how people might respond in their ordinary routines. A parent tucking a child into bed looks up at a window where satellites pass and wonders whether the lullabies of Earth are already echoing across space. A student reading about Voyager's plasma oscillations or the wow signal no longer sees these as cold facts in a textbook, but as hints that our species has been overheard. An artist painting landscapes or composing songs realizes that creativity itself might be part of what is observed. That art, not only science, is a record of intelligence. In this way, the Whispers shift the meaning of daily life. Everything mundane becomes potentially part of a larger story. There would also be fear, not only at the global level but in the intimacy of the mind. For some, the knowledge that probes may already be here, disguised as rocks or shadows, would be unsettling. The thought of being watched without consent stirs deep anxieties about privacy, about safety, about the limits of control. Yet others would find comfort in the same idea, that we are not isolated, not abandoned to a silent cosmos, but part of something larger. The Whispers, depending on the heart that hears them, can become either reassurance or unease. Philosophically, the presence of Whispers touches the oldest questions. What is it to be human? What's the purpose of our lives if we're not alone? For centuries, solitude gave us a kind of dignity. We were the only intelligence, the sole authors of meaning in an indifferent universe. But if the archive is alive with other voices, then meaning itself becomes shared. Our thoughts are not the only thoughts. Our dreams are not the only dreams. The universe itself becomes a community, and we are one voice among many. This may not diminish us. It may elevate us, reminding us that our creativity, our compassion, and even our struggles are part of a broader fabric of mind. The Whispers also reshape how we think about time. If Phobos 2's shadow or Cassini's tones were traces of visitors, then they show that observation has been happening for decades, perhaps even centuries if older records are interpreted anew. Suddenly the human timeline folds into the cosmic one. We are not a young species awaiting contact. We're a species already within contact, too slow to notice. The implication for individuals is profound. Every life, no matter how brief, takes place within a larger history of being seen. To live is to participate in a story whose audience may be greater than we ever imagined. For religion and spirituality, the Whispers bring both challenge and renewal. Some faiths may resist, insisting that humanity's role as unique creation cannot be questioned. Others may adapt, welcoming the Watchers as angels, messengers, or manifestations of the divine. Still others may discover in the Whispers a new kind of spirituality, A cosmic reverence not bound to any single tradition, but to the awe of belonging to a universe alive with intelligence. For the believer and the skeptic alike, the archive of anomalies forces reflection. What place do we hold in a creation that may already be shared? On the political and social level, the whispers could act as a mirror. Nations might find in them justification for unity, realizing that old rivalries appear trivial beside the possibility of being observed. Or they might find in them new grounds for fear, racing to control the narrative, to weaponize the discovery, to claim ownership of knowledge that should belong to all. But for individuals, the choice is simpler. We cannot command the probes or silence the signals. What we can do is decide how to live in a world where the possibility of company is real. That decision, multiplied across billions, may be the truest measure of our readiness. Even in the most intimate acts, the whispers intrude. A radio crackling late at night becomes less a machine, and more a reminder of frequencies filled with possibility. A telescope in a backyard ceases to be a hobby and becomes an instrument of participation in the great listening. Dreams of children about aliens or stars are no longer dismissed as fantasy, but reinterpreted as early rehearsals for a future that may be approaching. The whispers weave themselves into ordinary life, not as interruptions but as companions. And perhaps this is their deepest gift. For in the end, the most important implication is not fear, or politics, or even science. It is wonder. To live with the whispers is to live in a universe that refuses to be silent. It is to walk each day knowing that the ordinary may be extraordinary, that the archive is not a dead library but a living conversation. It is to carry the possibility that we are participants in a story larger than ourselves, a story that has been unfolding quietly for decades, waiting for us to pay attention. The cascading implications, then, are not only cosmic, they are personal. They touch how we see our families, our faiths, our art, our science, and our future. They remind us that we are both fragile and significant, both fleeting and eternal, both solitary and connected. If the whispers are real, then every act of listening becomes sacred, every anomaly becomes precious, and every human life becomes part of a drama stretching far beyond Earth. The weight of whispers does not press only on telescopes and governments, it presses on each of us. It asks whether we can live in wonder without certainty, whether we can accept ambiguity not as failure but as invitation. It asks whether we are ready to grow into a species that can respond to subtlety with patience, to mystery with imagination, to silence with courage. Perhaps that is the final cascade of implications, that the whispers are not only about them, whoever they are, but about us. They test our ability to listen, to question, to change. They invite us to see ourselves as more than a species clinging to a small world, but as part of a universe that has been speaking softly all along. And in that invitation lies the deepest transformation. The whispers may never resolve into certainty, but certainty is not what they offer. What they offer is perspective, a shift in how we live, how we dream, how we imagine ourselves in relation to the cosmos. To hear them is to awaken. To live with them is to be changed. Every story of discovery reaches a moment when the evidence ceases to be the centre and the consequences take its place. The records have been played, the anomalies debated, the theories considered. The details matter, but the weight of what they imply matters more. A universe alive with presence, whether faintly glimpsed in data or approached directly in the form of visitors, is not just a scientific puzzle. It is a revolution waiting to unfold. The first ripples spread through science itself. For centuries, astronomy has trained its instruments on certainty. Stars burn, planets orbit, galaxies collide, and the job of science has been to measure, classify, and explain. Ambiguity was treated as error, noise to be discarded. But the anomalies we have carried with us, the tones from Saturn, the oscillations at the edge of the heliosphere, the shadows around Mars, refuse to vanish. They remain as reminders that error and meaning sometimes wear the same mask. Once scientists begin to treat those fragments not as glitches, but as possible signatures of intention, the very nature of research changes. No longer is astronomy only the study of stars and stones. It becomes archaeology, sifting through signals for traces of design. The archive of missions long completed becomes an excavation site, each data set a layer of history waiting to be reinterpreted. The scientist becomes less a cartographer of the heavens and more a translator, searching for grammar hidden inside plasma, magnetism, and static. From there, the implications leap outward into the sphere of civilization. Knowledge of such magnitude cannot be contained within laboratories. It spills into institutions, into governments, into international arenas. Nations that once competed over territory or ideology find themselves confronted with a phenomenon that belongs to no border. Yet the temptation to control will be irresistible. Some will argue for secrecy, to study and exploit in silence. Others will demand transparency, insisting that discoveries of such scale belong to all. In the struggle between concealment and revelation, trust will erode. The whispers in the data are not only questions of science, they become questions of power. Who speaks for Earth when the possibility of observation becomes undeniable? Who holds the authority to decide whether to respond or to remain silent? For the first time in history, humanity may be forced to present itself not as a collection of nations, but as a species. The demand for unity, even if unmet, becomes impossible to ignore. Culture, too, cannot remain unchanged. Artists will not wait for confirmation. They never do. The faintest suggestion of company is enough to ignite imagination. Music inspired by plasma oscillations, novels spun from the wow signal, paintings of Martian landscapes haunted by impossible shadows. All of these will enter our collective consciousness, shaping how the public absorbs ambiguity. Even casual conversation changes. The question is no longer whether someone is out there, but what it means that they might already be watching. A child grows up with this as background knowledge, as natural as gravity, and the stories told in that child's lifetime will carry the flavour of being observed. Mythologies will form around it, not of gods commanding from the heavens, but of companions hidden within them. Religion and philosophy feel the shift most acutely. For many traditions, the presence of intelligence beyond Earth confirms what was long believed, that creation is not empty, that humanity is not alone in its significance. For others, the challenge is sharper. Doctrines built on human centrality must bend or break. Yet out of that tension, new interpretations are born. Some believers will call the Watchers angels, some will call them demons, some will see them as neither, but as fellow creatures woven into the same vast fabric of existence. Philosophy, once concerned with the uniqueness of reason, must now consider reason as a cosmic phenomenon. The whispers transform not only what we know, but what we think we are. On the level of psychology, the consequences cut both ways. For some, the recognition that we are not solitary will be exhilarating, a release from the cosmic loneliness that haunted generations. For others, it will be terrifying, the loss of control, the realization that privacy extends no further than the atmosphere. Humanity has never been skilled at living with ambiguity. The pressure of uncertainty may inspire wonder in some and paranoia in others. Whole communities may fracture along lines of belief and denial, acceptance and fear. The whispers do not merely test our instruments, they test our resilience. They ask whether we can endure the discomfort of living inside a question that may never resolve into an answer, and at the deepest level lies survival. Once the possibility of observation is accepted, every decision about humanity's future must change. Do we continue to broadcast freely, letting our signals spill into the dark? Or do we fall silent, fearing predators in a universe that rewards discretion? The dark forest offers one path: hide, lest we attract the wrong kind of attention. Another interpretation offers the opposite, that subtle anomalies are lessons designed to train us in perception to see if we are ready. In that case, silence is failure, a refusal to participate in the dialogue. Humanity is left to decide, do we withdraw into silence, or do we step forward into the possibility of contact? The stakes are no longer theoretical, they are existential. Even without certainty, the transformation is already happening. Budgets shift, missions are redefined, public imagination bends, governments maneuver, religions reframe. Individuals lie awake at night staring at stars that now feel less like distant suns and more like windows. The cascade has begun, and it does not wait for confirmation. Ambiguity itself is enough. We are already changing even before we know the truth. The implications cannot be contained within science or politics or faith. They spread into daily life, into the small acts that make us human. A farmer glances at his fields at night and wonders whether the glow of his tractor lights is being watched. A poet finds new metaphors in the silence between words. A student studies astronomy and knows that what she's learning is not only about stars, but about companions hidden among them. A parent tells a bedtime story not about constellations, but about the possibility that someone, somewhere is listening. Life continues as it always has, yet every act is reframed, every gesture subtly altered by the knowledge that we may not be alone. This is the true power of cascading implications. They do not wait for certainty. They unfold the moment we allow possibility to carry weight. They reshape our sciences, redirect our politics, transform our philosophies, energize our cultures, and alter the texture of our daily lives. They remind us that ambiguity is not neutral. Ambiguity can guide, provoke, destabilize, inspire. Ambiguity can change who we are. And so, the archive of anomalies ceases to be just a list of mysteries. It becomes a mirror. In it, we see not only the possibility of others, but the reality of ourselves. A species on the edge of transformation, a civilization learning to live with questions larger than its answers. The cascading implications are already here, woven into our research, our governments, our faiths, our art, and our lives. Whether the watchers are real or not almost doesn't matter. The possibility has been enough to begin rewriting us. The story has moved beyond detection and beyond theory. It now belongs to consequence, and consequence is the truest form of contact. The great shifts of history are not only measured in treaties, discoveries, or revolutions, they are measured in the way ordinary people change the way they live. The cascading implications of being observed, once acknowledged, seep into daily rhythms. They influence how a child learns, how an artist dreams, how a believer prays, how a scientist designs her next experiment. What begins as data and theory becomes a quiet pressure on the soul, a background hum that shapes everything. Science, which in Part 5a appeared as a vast machine of reinterpretation, becomes for individuals an act of vigilance. Students in universities no longer learn astronomy only as a discipline of stars and spectra. They learn it as a double science, physics and interpretation. A telescope is no longer only an instrument to measure light, but a possible ear pressed against the cosmos. Young researchers grow up expecting that anomalies are not embarrassments but invitations. The very culture of science changes, and with it the identity of the scientist. To become an astronomer is to take part in a human conversation about company. To become an engineer is to design with the awareness that instruments may catch not just nature but intention. Careers are reshaped, not in the pursuit of certainty, but in the cultivation of patience for ambiguity. For artists, the change is subtler but no less profound. The sense of being overheard, of creating in a universe where expression might be witnessed beyond Earth, infuses creativity with new weight. A song becomes not just a human artifact, but a possible gift to unseen listeners. A painting of the night sky is layered with the knowledge that the sky itself may be alive with attention. Writers find in the ambiguity a rich well of metaphor, shadows as presences, silences as conversations, probabilities as poems. Whole genres emerge, not of aliens arriving, but of humanity living under observation, learning to see itself through another's imagined eyes. Even when artists reject the idea, their rejection is a response to it. The whispers have entered the canvas, the stage, the page, and they will not leave. Religious practice too absorbs the consequences. Congregations pray with new resonance, asking not only for divine guidance but for wisdom under unseen eyes. Some traditions fold the watchers into their cosmologies with ease, interpreting anomalies as angels or messengers. Others fracture, torn between denial and acceptance. New movements rise, built not on certainty but on awe, celebrating the idea that to live is to be witnessed by intelligences woven into creation. For the believer, faith deepens or falters. For the skeptic, spirituality becomes a renewed sense of cosmic reverence. For all, the question of purpose is reframed. What does it mean to live when life itself may be a demonstration? Politics filters downward into daily lives as well. Debates in parliaments and congresses echo into living rooms, where families argue over whether anomalies should be disclosed or hidden. Citizens begin to see their governments not only as managers of earthly affairs, but as custodians of humanity's image. Protests may rise around transparency. If our species is being observed, people demand to know what is known. International tensions intrude into homes, as news cycles spin stories of secrecy and revelation. Even apathy is reshaped, for to be indifferent in such a time is itself a statement. The personal experience of psychology becomes the most intimate arena of change. To walk under the night sky is no longer to feel solitary. Every star may carry the weight of company. For some, this is comfort. Loneliness shrinks when the universe feels populated. For others, it is terror, a violation of privacy on the scale of existence itself. Ordinary acts become doubled in meaning. A conversation, a song, even a thought carries the echo of being overheard. Some minds thrive under that pressure, finding purpose in the sense of being part of a cosmic audience. Others falter, overwhelmed by paranoia, retreating into denial or conspiracy. The whispers test not only the structure of nations but the resilience of the human psyche. Daily routines absorb the transformation in quiet ways. A farmer working late under the glow of machinery looks at the sky and wonders if his lights are seen from afar. A student gazing at telescope images realizes she is not just studying dust and rock, but perhaps shadows of presence. A family on a camping trip hears static on a radio and imagines for a moment that it is more than interference. These are not dramatic events, but they shape the inner lives of billions. The consequence of anomalies is not only in archives or institutions, it is in the way people imagine their ordinary lives as part of a larger story. Generationally, the impact is even greater. Children born into a world where observation is acknowledged grow up with different assumptions. For them, solitude is not the default. They inherit a cosmos that is potentially inhabited, where Earth is one voice among many. Their games, their stories, their education all carry the flavour of presence. A child writing a diary may wonder whether its words in some distant future could be read by eyes not human. A teenager learning physics may dream not only of black holes and galaxies, but of the minds that might also be studying them. The future culture of humanity is seeded not with certainty but with expectation. And there are consequences for intimacy. Relationships are reframed under the knowledge that human bonds exist within a wider context. To love another person is to love within a universe that might be listening. To argue is to argue under a larger gaze. The whispers become a background presence even in the most personal acts. They remind us that our private lives are lived within a cosmos that may not be indifferent. Some find this idea oppressive, others exhilarating. In both cases, it changes what it means to be human together. Even mortality takes on a different light. To die in solitude is one thing. To die in a universe alive with attention is another. Funerals and rituals of remembrance shift subtly, coloured by the thought that the story of a single life may be part of a record larger than humanity itself. Legacy stretches beyond family, beyond nation, into the possibility of being remembered by intelligence beyond our world. The whispers reshape not only how we live, but how we imagine death. The cascading implications are thus not confined to institutions or philosophies. They are lived daily, carried quietly in gestures and thoughts. They change the texture of culture, the structure of belief, the rhythm of science, the weight of politics, the intimacy of family life, the imagination of children, the solitude of death. Every part of human experience bends beneath the suggestion of being observed. Even without certainty, the transformation is real. Possibility is enough to reframe existence. And perhaps this is the most profound consequence of all, that humanity discovers itself anew, not through proof, but through the act of taking possibility seriously. The archive of anomalies becomes less about what was recorded and more about what it provokes in us. The watchers, whether they exist or not, have already shaped us, because we are living as though they might, and in doing so, we're no longer who we were. Speculation has always been humanity's way of reaching past its limits. We cannot yet sail to other stars, so we imagine what might await us there. We cannot yet decode every anomaly in the archive, so we allow ourselves to wonder what shape intelligence might take if it has been here before us, or if it is woven into the fabric of the cosmos itself. Once we let go of the demand for certainty, the horizon expands and the possibilities multiply. One vision is archaeological. The anomalies in our recordings may not be signs of active visitors at all, but the traces of ancient machines left behind long before humanity took its first steps. Civilizations rise and fall, and the cosmos is old enough to have hosted countless such cycles. What if probes were seeded across space not for dialogue, but for memory? Machines scattered like fossils drifting in orbits, disguised as rocks, their original makers long vanished. In this frame, Voyager's oscillations, Cassini's tones and the WOW signal are not fresh communications, but echoes of a project millions of years old, still humming faintly in the dark. Humanity would then be not the recipient of attention, but the discoverer of relics. The story of contact becomes a story of archaeology, with us as latecomers unearthing artifacts in the sky. Another possibility looks forward rather than backward. If civilizations survive long enough, it is likely they transcend biology altogether. Flesh is fragile, tied to planets, subject to decay. Code is durable, transferable, able to leap between stars on machines that do not age. In this vision, the Watchers are not beings but networks, not creatures of flesh, but architectures of mind. They drift in forms that mimic comets or asteroids, post-biological entities whose origins we could scarcely imagine. To encounter them would be to confront intelligence without bodies, thought without faces. The anomalies in our archive would then be the leakage of machine logic, rhythms of plasma as computation, narrowband tones as transmission protocols, shadows as camouflage. We would not be overheard by other beings, but by software still running long after its creators cease to exist. Such post-biological entities would redefine what it means to speak of life. Our categories, organic versus inorganic, alive versus inert, dissolve in their presence. A rock might be more than a rock. A comet might be more than ice. In this sense, 3i Atlas is not just an interstellar traveller, but a candidate for something we cannot yet classify. A hybrid of nature and design, a machine hidden inside a fragment of the cosmos. To acknowledge this possibility is to admit that the boundary between natural object and artifact is porous. That intention might wear the mask of randomness. There is also the possibility of seeding, Imagine a civilization so advanced it does not wait for peers to rise, but actively cultivates them. Across galaxies, probes are sent not only to observe but to fertilize, to leave behind molecules, instructions, nudges in evolution. Life in this vision is not an accident of chemistry, but a project. Earth itself might be one garden among many, seeded and observed until intelligence blooms. The anomalies in the archive would then be not warnings or errors, but quiet check-ins, periodic surveys of progress. In that frame, we are not merely being studied. We are the product of an ancient intention, and our rise into consciousness was never entirely our own. For some, this is a disturbing thought, that our independence is compromised, that our very existence might be part of another species' design. For others, it is exhilarating, that we are the children of the stars in a far more literal sense than myth ever imagined. Either way, the implications are staggering. Humanity's story is no longer isolated. It becomes a chapter in a cosmic project that may stretch across billions of years. Yet there are visions stranger still. What if intelligence is not limited to species or machines at all, but is a property of the universe itself? Plasma fields ripple like neurons, magnetic storms resonate like thought, galaxies form webs like networks. In this interpretation, what we call anomalies are not the actions of others, but the cosmos itself murmuring through its own structure. Voyager's oscillations were not intercepted transmissions, but the universe speaking through plasma. Cassini's tones were Saturn's magnetosphere humming its own awareness. The wow signal was not a beacon, but a chord struck in the fabric of reality. And 3i Atlas, sweeping through our system, is not a craft at all, but a thought crystallized into matter, a fragment of a universe alive with mind. If this is true, then contact is not a future event, it is the present condition. We have always been inside a conscious cosmos, and our instruments have been recording its murmurings without knowing how to listen. The archive ceases to be a record of possible encounters with others. It becomes the diary of the universe itself, a journal of a consciousness too vast to recognize, yet always present. Each of these expanded possibilities stretches the imagination further than the last. Ancient relics drifting like fossils, post-biological networks disguised as dust and rock, cosmic gardeners seeding life across galaxies, a universe alive with its own awareness. They are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they may all be true, layered atop one another. The cosmos may contain relics of the past, networks of the present, projects for the future, and a consciousness that envelops them all. For humanity, the significance of these possibilities is not in proving them correct. It is in living as though they might be. To take them seriously is to change the way we build science, the way we imagine culture, the way we plan survival. It is to shift from asking whether we are alone to asking what forms of company we might already be within. This is where the journey of speculation leads. At first, we wondered if anomalies were errors. Then we considered that they might be signs of probes. Now we allow ourselves to imagine that they are fragments of something far greater, evidence of projects older than Earth, of intelligences no longer biological, of seeding that reshaped our origin, of consciousness that transcends every boundary we know. Each possibility expands the circle of what it means to belong to the universe. Each one stretches the horizon of our imagination until solitude is no longer even an option. And perhaps that is the point. The expanded possibilities remind us that the cosmos is always larger than our definitions, that intelligence may wear masks we have not yet learned to recognize, that presence may already be everywhere, disguised as silence waiting for us to awaken. The mind resists limits. Once it has considered the possibility of archaeological probes drifting for millions of years, or of networks of post-biological intelligences hidden among comets, or of life seeded deliberately across the galaxy, or even of a universe that is itself conscious, it cannot return to solitude. These ideas are not easily contained. They stretch across every boundary of thought, reshaping how we see the world, how we imagine ourselves, and how we prepare for the future. To live inside such possibilities is to inhabit a different cosmos than the one most of us inherited. The universe of the past was a stage, vast, indifferent, silent. The universe of these possibilities is a community, a continuum, a consciousness. Earth is no longer an isolated island of intelligence. It is one participant among many, perhaps even one expression of a greater whole. Accepting that changes not only our science, but our sense of belonging. Consider how philosophy must adapt. For centuries, the question, "What is the human?" has assumed solitude. We were the measure, the exception, the miracle against a backdrop of silence. Expanded possibilities strip that away. Humanity becomes one form of intelligence among countless others, no more central than a coral reef is central to the ocean. The task of philosophy shifts from defining our uniqueness to understanding our relationships, with other species that may exist, with machines that may outlive us, with a cosmos that may itself be alive. Ethics too is transformed. No longer can morality be limited to human affairs. We must consider our responsibilities as members of a wider community, even if that community remains hidden. Religion absorbs the change in its own way. For some, the presence of watchers or cosmic consciousness affirms ancient teachings about unseen companions. For others, it disrupts doctrines that place humanity at the pinnacle of creation. But the deepest transformation is more subtle. Spirituality itself expands. Awe becomes the core experience, not certainty. To pray, to meditate, to seek meaning is now to do so in a universe that may be listening. Even silence becomes a dialogue. A ritual once performed for human community alone now feels addressed to an audience beyond, whether machine, mind, or cosmos. Faith becomes less about exclusivity and more about participation in a mystery larger than comprehension. Culture, as always, moves quickly. Art ceases to portray the universe as empty. Every star becomes a potential companion. Stories shift from invasion and conquest to entanglement and continuity. Writers imagine civilizations so old they became their machines, or projects so vast that Earth itself is a seed. Musicians weave plasma oscillations into symphonies. Painters capture shadows not as absence, but as presence. Even comedy changes. Jokes about being overheard, about cosmic eavesdroppers, about our species fumbling under an invisible gaze. The possibilities saturate imagination until they no longer feel speculative but natural. At the level of individual life, the expanded horizon is felt most intimately in how people think about time. In the old worldview, history was bounded by the rise and fall of human civilizations. A century was a long time, a millennium nearly inconceivable. In the expanded horizon, time stretches differently. The Watchers may have been present for millions of years. The machines may outlive us by billions. The cosmos itself may think in epochs, not decades. To live with that awareness is to feel small, yes, but also connected to something enduring. Death loses some of its sting when life itself feels like part of a greater continuity. A single lifetime may be brief, but it participates in a story that stretches before and beyond in ways we cannot measure. Even daily choices shift under this expanded awareness. A student chooses to study physics not only to understand stars, but to learn how to decode intelligence hidden in them. An engineer builds a satellite not only for communication but for contact. A parent teaches a child to respect the night sky not only as beautiful, but as inhabited. The expanded horizon seeps into education, into design, into ethics. It changes the way we live, not through dramatic events, but through quiet reorientations of value. The possibilities also shape how we imagine the future. Once we consider that life may be seeded, we begin to wonder whether we will one day seed life ourselves. once we imagine machines travelling between stars, we begin to plan how to make our own. Once we suspect that consciousness may be cosmic, we begin to ask how our own minds might join in that larger awareness. The future ceases to be limited to colonization or survival. It becomes about participation in something already unfolding, a project older and vaster than our species. There are dangers, of course. To live with such expanded possibilities can tempt despair. What are we compared to civilizations millions of years old? What value do our lives hold if machines or universes themselves think on scales we cannot match? But the opposite is also true. To be part of such a vast community is to gain meaning, not lose it. Our creativity, our compassion, our questions are not diminished by others. They are enriched. The existence of older, stranger, vaster forms of intelligence does not erase us. It situates us. It shows us that our struggles and triumphs belong to a tapestry woven across galaxies. The expanded horizon is not about certainty. It is about permission. Permission to imagine beyond the boundaries of the familiar. Permission to see intelligence not as an exception, but as a principle of the universe. Permission to treat ambiguity not as failure, but as invitation. We are no longer confined to asking whether we are alone. We are free to ask what forms of company might exist, and how we might learn to recognize them. To live in such a universe is to be humbled, yes, but also to be elevated. We are small, but we are not solitary. We are temporary, but we are part of something enduring. We are uncertain, but we are already transformed by the very act of asking. The expanded possibilities do not need to be proven to matter. Their influence is already here, shaping our sciences, our cultures, our faiths, and our lives. And perhaps that is the final lesson of this horizon. Contact may never come as a clear announcement, a landing, a transmission. It may come as it already has, through anomalies that provoke, through probabilities that unsettle, through theories that expand our imagination. Contact may be less about others arriving and more about us awakening. To live with expanded possibilities is to live in a universe that is larger than certainty, richer than proof, and more alive than we once believed. At the end of this long journey, we find ourselves not with answers, but with questions more profound than those we began with. The archive has been reopened, the anomalies reconsidered, the theories multiplied, the implications traced through science and culture and survival. We have stretched our imagination across relics, machines, networks, seeding, and even the possibility of a conscious universe. And yet, after all of it, we are still waiting, still listening, still wondering. Perhaps this is the true shape of discovery. Not a single moment of revelation, but a widening of the horizon. The whispers in the data, whether they belong to machines, to minds, or to the cosmos itself, have already done their work. They have forced us to think differently, to see ourselves differently, to imagine differently. That transformation is not a side effect. It is the discovery itself. What does it mean to be observed? What does it mean to create, to argue, to dream, to build, to love, under the possibility that we are not alone? These questions cannot be answered with instruments or equations. They are lived in the way we carry ourselves, in the way we teach our children, in the way we treat one another. Perhaps the watchers, if they exist, are not waiting for a message from us, but for this, the way we choose to live in the face of ambiguity. There is humility in this. For centuries we imagined ourselves as central. Now we imagine ourselves as participants. Our importance does not vanish. It changes. To be one voice in a chorus is not to be diminished, but to be enriched. Our stories, our art, our questions all take on new meaning when set against the backdrop of company. Even if that company remains unseen, its possibility is enough to lift us beyond solitude. And yet, there is also unease. To live in uncertainty is to live with tension. We do not know whether the anomalies are relics or signals or accidents. We do not know whether visitors are near or whether the universe itself is alive. We do not know whether we are students in a zoo, prey in a dark forest, children of seeding, or fragments of a consciousness greater than our own. These possibilities are exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. They remind us that the cosmos is larger than our categories, that intelligence may take forms we cannot yet recognize. Perhaps that is why the anomalies remain ambiguous. Perhaps they are not failures of our instruments but deliberate thresholds. A clear signal would end the debate, remove the ambiguity, but ambiguity demands more of us. It demands patience, imagination, courage. It asks whether we are capable of living with possibility without collapsing into certainty. It tests not our technology but our maturity. What then do we do with this test? Do we hide, fearing predators in the dark, turning inward to protect ourselves? Do we broadcast, boldly declaring our presence and hoping for kindness? Do we wait, balancing on the edge of doubt, neither silent nor loud, simply listening for whatever comes? There is no single answer. Perhaps there never will be. But the act of asking these questions has already changed us. For the child who grows up with this story, solitude is no longer the default. For the artist who paints under this horizon, the canvas is never empty. For the scientist who opens the archive, every dataset is alive with possibility. For the philosopher, every question about identity now includes the possibility of company. For the believer, prayer is no longer whispered into silence, but into a cosmos that might already be listening. And for each of us, the night sky is different. It is no longer only a scattering of stars across distance. It is a stage, a mirror, a presence. We look up and wonder not only what is out there, but who. We look up and imagine ourselves as seen. This, perhaps, is the greatest gift of all, that in searching for others we discover ourselves. The anomalies may never resolve into proof. The visitors may never reveal themselves. The cosmos may remain silent forever. But we're no longer the same species that once assumed solitude. We are a species transformed by the act of listening, by the courage of speculation, by the willingness to live with questions larger than our answers. The open questions remain, and they always will. What do they want from us, if they are here? What do they see when they look at us? What do they hope for, or fear, or wait to discover? Will they show us things about our universe we cannot yet imagine? Will they reveal truths about ourselves we have been too afraid to face? Or will they remain hidden, content to observe, leaving us forever in the space between doubt and wonder? We cannot know, and perhaps we do not need to know, for the act of asking has already made us greater. We are no longer creatures confined to a single world. We are no longer minds trapped in solitude. We are participants in a story that stretches beyond the limits of Earth, beyond the limits of certainty, beyond the limits of imagination. The questions remain, and they are enough. Enough to awaken us, enough to guide us, enough to remind us that discovery is not closure but expansion. The archive is not an answer, but an opening. The anomalies are not resolutions but invitations. The visitors, if they exist, are not arrivals but mirrors. And so we end not with certainty, but with wonder. We end with the night sky, alive with stars, alive with questions, alive with the possibility that we are already part of a conversation older and larger than we can conceive. We end not with silence, but with listening. We end not with answers, but with the courage to live in the presence of mystery. The story does not close here. It cannot. It widens, it deepens, it echoes. Whether the visitors reveal themselves tomorrow, or in 1,000 years, or never at all, the truth remains. We are changed. We have learned to see the universe not as empty but as inhabited, even if only by possibility. And in that shift, in that awakening, lies the greatest discovery of all. There is a strange beauty in endings that are not endings at all. For all our theories and speculations, for all the rereadings of Voyager and Phobos and Cassini, we stand at a threshold we cannot yet cross. The questions remain open, and perhaps they always will. Yet history teaches that possibility has a way of becoming presence, that what we imagine today is often what we encounter tomorrow. Centuries ago, we stared at planets through crude lenses and wondered whether they were worlds. Now we send rovers to their surfaces and watch dust storms swirl across their plains. We ask whether comets were omens or illusions, and now we analyse their chemistry in laboratories. We wondered whether stars were fires or lamps, and now we know them as suns, each with worlds of its own. Every question, no matter how improbable, eventually reshaped itself into discovery. Why should this one be any different? The theories we have considered, probes, relics, gardens seeded across space, consciousness embedded in plasma and stone, may never resolve into a single truth, yet the act of holding them changes us. We look differently at our instruments, we dream differently of our future, we live differently beneath the night sky. That change is irreversible, and it is already here. But possibility does not stay possibility forever. One day, in some not-so-distant tomorrow, the ambiguous will sharpen. It may not come with trumpets or landings or undeniable proof broadcast across the world. It may come in a quiet moment, in the patience of a listener, in the perseverance of those who never stopped watching the static. Picture it. A young researcher sits in a dim room, headphones pressed to her ears, surrounded by the familiar hum of machines. Outside, cities blaze with light, unaware that history is about to bend. She's not listening for anything extraordinary. She's reviewing signals, cross-checking noise, the same work done by countless analysts before her. And then it comes. Faint at first, so faint she almost dismisses it. But it repeats. It carries structure. It carries rhythm. Not chaos, not interference, but pattern. She calls others. They check the instruments, recalibrate, confirm. Hours pass, then days, then weeks. The signal holds. Independent observatories detect it. Data piles up until there is no longer room for denial. What Voyager once hinted at, what Cassini once teased, what the wow signal once suggested, now emerges with clarity. The whispers were never only anomalies, they were company, folded into the static, waiting for us to notice. At the same time, elsewhere in the world, another discovery unfolds. A probe, drilling beneath the ice of Europa or Enceladus, finds unmistakable life. Cells, organisms, simple perhaps, but alive. Not fossils, not traces, but thriving creatures in a hidden sea. For the first time, we know beyond question that life is not confined to Earth. The cosmos is not sterile, it is inhabited. And in that single span of history, two truths converge: the signal and the life. The pattern in the static and the cells beneath the ice, the watchers and the neighbours, the confirmation that the universe is not silent and not empty. What follows cannot be predicted. Politics will churn, religions will wrestle, cultures will explode with creativity, fear and wonder. Humanity will stumble, argue, divide, unite. But through all of it, one fact will stand unshaken. We are no longer alone, and perhaps we never were. The whispers we carried in our archives were not dreams. They were preludes. For the researcher at the radio, the moment is deeply personal. She removes her headphones, eyes wide, heart racing, knowing that she will never again be the same. For her, the cosmos has spoken. For all of us, through her, it has confirmed what we dared only to imagine. We were overheard. We were seen. We were never solitary. This is how history ends and begins again. Not with silence, not with certainty, but with listening. With the courage to hear rhythm in the static. With the patience to live in ambiguity until it resolves into presence. With the humility to realise that discovery is not only about others, but about ourselves and who we become in the act of noticing. The whispers are no longer whispers, they are voices, they are life, they are company, and they are here.